Well, thank you very much for giving me some time. Can you hear me? Is this working well enough? Can you hear me back there? How's that? How's that? Okay. And CL, do you want me just to stand here or whatever? So let me just say, I'm Michael Bennet. I'm so grateful to be here with you tonight. As you know, I've been your senator for the last 16 years or so, and before that I was the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, and before that I worked in the city and county of Denver for John Hickenlooper when he was mayor. I don't know whatever happened to that guy. I'm just... See, everybody's with it tonight. And before that, I followed my wife to Colorado. She's a lawyer, and she had a job working for the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, defending public lands out throughout the American West. And I went into the private sector at the very beginning. All I was trying to do is get out of the practice of law. And I worked turning around distressed companies and then went to the other jobs that I mentioned. So I've got kind of an unusual background. I've been in the private sector, I've been in the public sector. I think being superintendent of schools will be the most rewarding job that I will ever have, in some ways the toughest job I'll ever have. And being in the Senate the past 3 terms, there's been amazing moments. Like when I got there, Barack Obama had just arrived in the presidency. You remember that? And then since that time, we've seen some downward slides, in my view. And when the second time that President Trump was elected, I started thinking hard about what I could do to make a bigger difference, because I felt like there are a lot of things that I blame Donald Trump for, but getting elected is not one of those things. You know, I blame the Democratic Party, of which I'm a part, for losing 2 elections to Donald Trump that we should never have lost. And there were a lot of mistakes that were made on the way to losing these elections, and these are results that our kids and grandkids should not have to bear, and they're having to bear it because of, and now we have a politics of chaos and division and hatred, and especially a politics of hating immigrants in this country and blaming them for everything. We're living at a time that's not the first time in American history when we have had a really tough economy, and it's really hard for people to get ahead no matter how hard they work. They feel like their kids are going to live a worse life than they have lived, and that really has not been the way America has worked since World War II, but that is kind of how it's working now, and I think President Trump is kind of preying on that. You know, I think in some sense he's sort of a symptom of that economic problem rather than the creator of every single problem. The question for all of us is, are we going to go down this path of chaos, division, and hatred, or are we going to go down a path that supports the next generation of Americans and that takes care of everybody here at Windsor Gardens, builds a political coalition that it can actually not just fight Trump, but beat Trump and beat Trumpism, or to be really graphic about it, drive a stake through Trumpism, which is what I think we need to do. I think that is what we need to do. And in this...
Michael, if you step back, there's a camera, and we put this on YouTube.
I was trying to avoid... No, I'm just kidding. And if we think about Colorado, let me ask you this. How many people in this room were born in Colorado? How many people were not born in Colorado? Yeah, isn't that amazing, CL? CL is 3rd generation. She's saying, all you newcomers, get out of here. But that's incredible. And we all came here for a reason. I came here for a reason. You know, I was following my wife, Susan, and we were getting married just as we came here. And we were able to buy a house in Park Hill that we could afford without breaking the bank. And we were able to raise our 3 most cherished daughters, the youngest of which, by the way, is now 21. The oldest is 26, 25, and 21. The 21-year-old is on my couch at home right now, recovering from getting her tonsils out. That's where I'm going after this. I know, but the point is, we were able to live the American dream. And now, when I travel Colorado, there's not a county left in our state where anybody thinks their kids or grandkids are going to be able to afford to live here. There's not, and it's not just housing. We're the 3rd most expensive state in America. 3rd most expensive state. for housing, for health care, for child care. It costs $20,000 in Colorado for one kid for child care. That's more than college costs. $27,000 for a family on health care. And when you throw in, on top of it, Donald Trump's tariffs and his ridiculous gas prices because of his war in Iran, all of it becomes a huge problem. And people begin to start thinking, well, our kids will never be able to afford to live here. I was at a senior citizens place the other day in Lakewood, and people were saying to me, we really like being with each other, but the problem is all our families have moved out of Colorado because they can't afford to live here anymore. And I think we can solve those problems. It's not going to be easy, but I think we can solve these problems. We're not going to do it by just coloring inside the lines. We're not going to do it by doing what we've been doing for 20 years. We're going to have to do different things. And I've spent my whole career making tough choices. I'm making my whole career telling the truth when it's been hard. And sometimes that's made me less popular than other times. But I think it's important because I feel a moral obligation to my own children. And I feel a moral obligation to your children and your grandchildren. And I think we all feel that way. That's the whole idea of being an American, I think, is leaving more, not less, to the people that are coming after us. Donald Trump doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. But that's what we care about. And I believe that Colorado can be a shining example for dealing with that cost of living crisis that regular people are facing in Colorado, and at the same time show the rest of the world that our exercise in self-government can still work, that rural people and urban people can actually work together, that Democrats and Republicans and unaffiliated voters can actually work together, that we can organize ourselves around a project. Will the next generation be able to afford to live in Colorado? That we can all agree is a worthy project. And that's why I decided to run for governor. I'll just finish by saying not a lot of senators run for governor. I admit it. I know my opponent, Phil Weiser, was here earlier, I think. And he's very fond of saying that there's a bumper sticker outside he'll say that says Michael Bennet for senator and Phil Weiser for governor. I don't think my Senate service, is more popular with anybody in America other than Phil Weiser and my mom. And my mom, who was born in 1938 in Warsaw, Poland, she was a Polish Jew. That was the year before Hitler invaded Warsaw, and she was actually separated from her parents for 3 years and told that they had been killed. Miraculously, they survived, and they came back together after the war was over, went to Sweden, went to Mexico City, and came to the only country in the world where they thought they could rebuild their shattered lives, and they did rebuild their shattered lives. And like most moms who end up with a kid in the U.S. Senate, her fondest hope is for me to die in the United States Senate. And she also loves watching me rip Bobby Kennedy's face off every time he comes to one of my committee meetings. But I think it is having an unusual set of experiences that has allowed me to, I think, create a more independent path sometimes and be able to think a little bit differently about the things that we're facing. And I think we need that leadership right now in Colorado. So for me, unlike Phil, really, this is not about his job and my job. It's about the families in Colorado that need to be able to live in a place that's not the third most expensive state in America. That is intolerable, in my opinion. And we have to fix that problem. So I know that I'm going to come to an end, but to answer Phil on this last point about if I stay in the Senate, I continue to be a senator, and he'll be the governor. There's another outcome here, which is if I become the governor, that means we need a new senator. And what I've committed, and I hope I don't offend anybody in this room who brought their resume tonight, what I have said is that person who will be in the Senate will be somebody who is less than 50 years old. There's one right back there. But you mentioned Sean Camacho. We have an incredible bench in Colorado. And I just believe that will be a glorious day for our state when we've got a new senator and somebody who can begin the work to make a difference in this country. Joe, I'm going to finish, but just by saying, I know it's an unusual choice. I said that earlier. It is an unusual choice. But so much is at risk in our country, so much is at stake in Colorado, that I feel like we all have to make unusual choices right now, and we've got to figure out how to dig ourselves out of the hole that we're in right now and be able to fulfill the American dream for the next generation. I believe we can do that. I know we can do that. I know we can fix these challenges over the next 10 years. So thank you all for being here tonight, and I'm happy to take whatever questions you have.
Because I have a bad
Dan,
hip, I'm
how are
going to
you?
sit and ask you questions.
Go ahead.
What's the problem? What is the problem facing Colorado? Do you think voters are underestimating?
I think the cost of living crisis, which is the most significant crisis that we're facing, is also the difficulty of solving it, I think, sometimes is underestimated.
Governor Polis has vetoed a bill to strengthen collective bargaining for 2 years in a row. What would you do different with that legislation as governor?
What I would do is, first of all, not threaten to veto the legislation in advance, which he has every single time, which takes the leverage away from the people that are going to the negotiating table. And what I've said is that I would like to bring together labor and management and see if we could get to a compromise where we keep the second vote but reduce the threshold of the percentage that's required. That's basically where Phil is on this as well.
There are currently, and this kind of gets to cost of living, there are currently no charter schools in Colorado that have collective bargaining. As governor, will you support employees, 75% are women, if they pursue collective bargaining?
I've never opposed collective bargaining for any kind of school, but I also think the most important thing that we're facing in Colorado is the effect of Tabor on our public education system and our inability to invest in our education system. We have for the wealth of our state, we have one of the lowest investments in public education in America. And it's getting to the point where it's profound. Our kids in Denver are only going to school 160 days a year. The kids around the country are going to school 180 days a year. By the way, imagine what it costs our families to pay for childcare for those 20 days, if you can even find childcare. That differential. We are losing teachers to Wyoming and to New Mexico and to Utah because those states are paying more because their budgets aren't as screwed up as the budget that we have. And let me tell you something else, and then I'll stop. When I was the superintendent years ago, I had faculty meetings every single day. Like right now, well, 2 hours earlier, I would have been at a faculty meeting in Denver. I never met a teacher who didn't live in Denver. That was one of the amazing things about teaching in Denver. Unlike Seattle or San Francisco or Portland, you could actually live in the community where you taught. Now, no teachers can afford to live here. In the Roaring Fork Valley, outside of Glenwood Springs and Aspen, the only way a teacher can afford to live there is if they win a lottery that their school district runs. And if you sit out there long enough with people, what you'll find is teachers are in tears because they didn't win the housing lottery. Or they're in tears because they won the housing lottery and they can stay. But that's no way to run an economy or a democracy. I was meeting with a food bank the other day from El Paso County that told me that one night a week they stay open late, and it's teachers' night, so that teachers can come to the food bank and get food to feed their own family. Can you imagine any decade in American history since World War II when we would have accepted that as a reality? You know, for a teacher teaching in the inner city of Chicago or the inner city of Denver or the inner city of Los Angeles or in the suburbs of any of those communities, if somebody said, oh yeah, we're paying our teachers so poorly that they have to go to a food bank to feed their own family. And yet that's the situation that we're in today. And that's the kind of stuff that we have to address, I think.
What's one specific action you take in your first year to make housing more affordable?
I would pull together the private sector and the nonprofit sector together and agree that what the top 5 or 6 things are we're going to do to make it affordable for the private sector to build housing again in Colorado. Because the reality is, as much as I might wish to build a bunch of Stalinist housing blocks in Colorado, this is not going to be a public effort. It's going to be the private sector that has to do it. And because labor costs are high in Colorado, construction costs are high, materials costs are high, we are going to have to cut red tape at the state and at the local level to be able to build starter homes for young people. And by the way, I think we need starter homes for seniors. That's how optimistic I am. I really do. I think we need something for people that are living in a house that they've lived their whole life in Colorado who might want to move on to something much smaller and much more affordable. They should have a place to go. So we need starter homes for young people and we need starter homes for seniors.
If the Colorado legislature votes to allow local control over rent stabilization, would you veto the bill?
I've said that I would not take anything off the table when it comes to trying to make housing more affordable. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay. I'll stop yelling. I'm just kidding.
No. You're getting, now for a little tougher one, campaign finance.
Yes.
You're getting over $3.5 million from more than a dozen billionaires, from Michael Bloomberg to Reed Hastings. Why? What's their agenda?
Well, they have funded a independent expenditure committee in this campaign. You'd have to ask them what their agenda is. I think my record is clear to everybody in Colorado that every step along the way I've worked hard on behalf of the people of Colorado. That's what I will continue to do. My opponent in this race has gotten about $4.5 million from either dark money or also oil and gas companies. So I think he and I would both say that we ought to reform the way our elections are run, both financed and also just how they're run. And so that's what I would say about that, CL.
So
I have a long record. I mean, I have not been. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you're familiar with the Montana plan?
I've heard about it. Yep.
Hawaii just passed legislation along what's called the Montana plan, a bipartisan bill to get Citizens United, to get around Citizens United by banning corporate financial contributions to campaigns. It doesn't ban billionaires from giving money directly because they're not corporations.
Right.
But I wondered what your thoughts were.
Well, I'd say this. I have for a decade probably, I have banned corporations from giving me money through their PACs. I have banned lobbyists from giving me money in Washington, D.C. too. And so I'm one of the very few incumbents that's followed that rule myself, and I'd be happy to look at what they're doing in Montana and Hawaii.
Okay.
Montana is also making some interesting choices on housing that I think we should be thinking about too. No, go ahead. Oh, I just am saying they are trying to figure out how to make Montana more affordable for the people that are living there, and it's become a place where the prices have been driven up over and over again by people that are moving in from out of state, and we're having some of that in Colorado.
How would you, let me switch to public lands.
Okay.
How would you balance energy development, recreation, and conservation on Colorado's public lands?
I would always tip the balance in favor of preservation of our public lands. And I always have. There is one of the, I have worked with local communities all over Colorado to preserve 700,000 acres of public lands. I started out working on Hermosa Creek in Durango. I started out working on Browns Canyon outside of Salida. I started out and we've protected these places. I was very proud that I did the work to protect Camp Hale. Some of you probably know the story of Camp Hale, where the 10th Mountain Division trained on skis. And I worked with veterans from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq who took an interest in the veterans who had been at Camp Hale and had actually taken interest in Camp Hale too, because they were healing themselves coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And I went to the Biden administration and I said, I think you should make this the first national monument of your administration. And Joe Biden flew out to Colorado and made it the first national monument of his administration. Now, that was a very proud day. It was a very proud day. But I think that you can only tell the story of Camp Hale, a World War II camp in Colorado, if you also tell the story of Camp Amache. That was also a World War II camp in Colorado. But it was a camp where we locked 12,000 Japanese Americans up just out of race hatred, as the governor at that time called it. And I worked very hard with Joe Neguse, the congressman from Boulder, and with, by the way, Cory Gardner, my Republican colleague in the Senate, to make Camp Amache part of the National Park Service, which it now is. And what's amazing to me about that story, when you think about Camp Hale and Camp Amache, it's the same war, it's the same fight against fascism, it's the same patriotism, it's the same fight against tyranny, and yet in one place we're training people to go fight Hitler on skis, and another place we're locking 12,000 people up at Camp Amache. And that just it's echoes of the moment that we're living in right now, and a reminder of how incredibly precious our democracy really is, how incredibly precious the rule of law really is, how incredibly important it is that we don't act out of racist intentions or impulses. And so my answer is I would never compromise the preservation of our public lands for any purpose, and I haven't. And by the way, I've led the fight in Washington to keep Trump from selling off the public lands, and Mike Lee, this guy from Utah, from selling off our public lands, and I'll continue to lead that fight as governor.
Well, your earlier comment kind of begs a question that's being asked. Colorado and the U.S. needs you in Washington. Why do you want to leave in the middle of your term as senator?
I just think that this is a moment where the real fight is going to come from the states, not from Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And I think I can lead a fight. You've watched what's gone on in Minnesota. I know you've seen that. You've seen what's going on in Illinois. You've seen the governor of California. These are where the battles are actually happening, and I think I have the experience to bring to the job at a moment when we need it. And I also believe that whoever replaces me, that young person who is under 50 years old, will be in the position of learn. You're very kind, not to, yeah. Will be in the position to be able to learn and become and learn how to be a senator. I think it'll be great, for Colorado. I think a lot of people will feel that way.
You've talked about tough decisions. Tell us about a position you've changed your mind on and what caused you to reconsider.
That is a great question.
I hate to say it, but I think it's GPT.
It was ChatGPT. You got to stop looking at ChatGPT. I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to keep thinking about this before, and I'll think.
You don't get to check with ChatGPT though for the answer.
I should. If this were a fair fight, I'd be able to do it. Look, I change my mind all the time, in a productive way. I don't get up believing that I have a monopoly on wisdom. What I believe in is our democracy, and I believe in it more now than I did before I went to the Senate. Let me tell you, and some of you may doubt that statement because of the dysfunction back there, or because you might have seen Ted Cruz in action back there. But what I've come to really treasure is living in a free society where we can express our point of view and change our minds based on the debate that we have, which is a luxury that nobody has in Putin's Russia. It's a luxury nobody has in Xi Jinping's China, and it's why those guys, I think, make worse decisions on average than we do. We make bad decisions, too. We've sent Donald Trump twice to be in the White House. That's a terrible decision that this democracy has made. But fortunately, we have the process in our DNA to improve our country and to make changes and that's what my immigrant grandparents and mom loved about this country. It's not that it's perfect, it's that we have a way of curing our imperfections, of recognizing the mistakes that Franklin Roosevelt made when he interned people at Camp Amache, and making sure that at least for a while we don't make such a terrible mistake again. And that's so I do. I mean, I'm happy to see politicians who evolve in the way they think about things. I think that's important.
So would you have pardoned Tina Peters?
I would never have pardoned Tina Peters. No.
Question, really.
Wait till you find out that she's coming to live at Windsor Gardens. I'm just kidding. She's not.
That was good. She couldn't afford it. Oh, no. Will you, as governor, protect us from the federal government as far as voting system?
Absolutely. We have the #1 voting system in America in Colorado. And it's awesome. It's amazing. It's incredible. I'm so proud of it. It's the gold standard for the entire country. And if you've ever seen some of my speeches on the floor, one of my favorite topics is to go down there and say, I'd like to see Donald Trump come to Western Colorado, to the Republican counties out there, and rip the ballots out of the hands of the Republican voters on the Western Slope, because I can assure you they will never give their ballots up. They'll never give them up. They know. We all know this is a fraud-free system. It is. It's fraud-free. And it's really convenient. And on top of ballots, we have same-day registration. That's a huge deal for young people. And Trump, he wants to disturb all of this just for his own craven political purposes. So yes, we have to protect it from him.
We also have our own Dropbox. The Western Slope people often feel forgotten, not getting funding and listening. What's your strategy for governing the whole state?
Well, first of all, I agree with people on the Western Slope who feel that way, and I think people on the Eastern Plains feel that way as well. And I think it's important to have a governor who has spent their, at least some of their career in rural Colorado. And that I've never lived there, but as a member of the Agriculture Committee, I've spent a ton of time in rural communities working on our water issues, working on our forestry issues, working to pass 3 farm bills with the farmers and ranchers in Colorado, getting billions and billions of dollars of roads and bridges built in our state. I just CL 2 or 3 weeks ago, we announced that the Shoshone project, I don't know if you guys have been following this, but the Shoshone Call is the Excel water call on the Colorado River, just upriver from Grizzly Creek on the river. We've been working for 10 years to try to get that transferred to the Colorado River District, which is on the western slope of Colorado. And believe it or not, Jeff Hurd, who's a Republican congressman from that part of the state, got Donald Trump to get $40 million, which had been committed by Joe Biden, but the money hadn't gone out. Got Donald Trump to send $40 million to Colorado to get that deal done. That's the most significant water deal we've done in Colorado in a generation. And as governor, that's the kind of deal that I would.
I thought Polis got that for pardoning data.
He did not. You might like to think that, CL, but that was a different deal.
Okay. Well, and speaking of water, how are you going to protect Denver's Colorado's
water? We've got it. First of all, I mean, I don't know how much time you've spent looking at this, but we're in rough shape. I don't want to scare anybody, but this is a year when we're going to put less water down the Colorado River than we had in a very, very, very long time. Blue Mesa Reservoir is half empty. And one of the things I've been saying to my colleagues in the Senate is you can't get water when there's no water, and if Blue Mesa is half empty already, what are you going to do? Take the other half? I mean, that's not going to solve the problem. And it would be a drop in the bucket anyway for those reservoirs downstream in the Colorado River. So we have to protect our interests for sure. On the other hand, I do not want the Supreme Court of the United States making a decision about how we're going to deal with, how we're going to ultimately make this decision. I don't really want the Department of Interior to making that decision. We're going to have a negotiation with the 7 states that are in the compact to update the compact. And I feel like the experience I've had in the Senate working on these issues all these years is going to stand me in good stead when we need to do that negotiation. Let me give you an example of that, by the way, CL. When we were working on I think it was the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the climate bill. It might have been the infrastructure bill, one of the others. I was sitting in an office in D.C., and I saw a colleague of mine. I heard a colleague of mine say that the money that was coming to the Colorado River, that all of it was going to go to the lower basin of the Colorado River, and we're in the upper basin in Colorado. And so I happened to be interviewed on TV on MSNBC right after that happened. And I said, there's no way I'm voting for this bill unless that money is shared between the upper basin and the lower basin. I'm not going to vote for the bill. And the next thing I know, my phone's ringing, and it's Chuckle Schumer on the other line saying, you better come in and talk about this. So I went in and talked about it. And then I just want you to know the agony that I've gone through for your benefit, CL. I spent that whole evening on Joe Manchin's boat and on the Potomac River trying to work out the deal that, made the $4 billion split between the upper basin and the lower basin. I'll never get that time back. I can tell you that. John Hickenlooper, by the way, he likes going on that boat. But he's a more gregarious guy than I am.
What's your strategy, leadership for getting health care for all for everybody in Colorado?
Well, first of all, I think we need health care for all in America. This is crazy. We have the most expensive, I don't have to tell you this, we have the most expensive system of health care in the industrialized world. It costs twice as much as any other country in the industrialized world. And I will say, I think we're getting worse results, too. It's insane. It makes no sense. So I do believe we need universal health care. I do believe that health care should be a right. It is a right. It has to be a right. It doesn't make any sense. All of us will get sick. What would happen, I was saying this to my daughter Ann this week, who's got the tonsil stuff, and is, I hope, waiting for me to come home. She's sawing wood, I'm sure, by now. But I said, can you imagine if you didn't live in a family that had health insurance and you were, instead of getting in line to get your tonsils out 1 year and then another year and then another? That's common in America. That's common. Can you imagine living in a society, this is our society, where your kids are, having mental health crises because of social media, COVID, all this stuff? I mean, we're having an epidemic of mental health issues, and yet we don't have access to it the way these other countries do. So I would say, first of all, we need it at a national level. What I'm suggesting for Colorado is a couple things, 3 things. One, I'd like us to figure out if we could have a true public option in our state so that people that don't want to buy private insurance don't have to rely on private insurance. They'd be able to buy into a system that makes sense. You may remember when we passed the Affordable Care Act, I was attacked for months and months and months during that campaign season. You had to watch all those ads where the Republicans were saying he's going to be the last senator that ever voted for the Affordable Care Act because he was the 60th vote. And I survived that election, actually, because of what we did in Colorado. And 30 million people who would have lost their health insurance in America didn't lose their health insurance because of what we did here in Colorado in 2010 to keep that seat blue. But you'll remember in the Affordable Care Act, we had a deal that said to kids they could stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26. You remember that? And now they're coming off, 15 years later, they're coming off their parents' insurance and they're saying to me, Michael, what am I supposed to do? Take 2 or 3 jobs to pay for this insurance? That is useless. And that has a $10,000 deductible. So that's one piece. Another piece would be to try to have other public employees buy into the state system. So the state employees are able to get the benefit of that insurance. I think county employees should get the benefit of it. School district employees. I'd like to see if we could get child care, folks that are working at child care facilities, the opportunity to buy in as well. And then I think we need to do a better job with Medicaid as a state. I mean, obviously Medicare is something that's really managed at the federal level, and we have to do everything we can to protect Medicare, protect Social Security. But Medicaid, I don't think it's been managed very well at the state level, and we're facing projected 9% increases a year for the next 10 years. That will bankrupt the state government if we do that, and we're going to have to figure out how to focus that program on patients and on doctors and not on insurance companies and not on venture capital firms that are making money from these systems in ways that I really don't think they should.
Similar, what support should the state provide to people caring for aging parents or spouses?
I think aging parents and spouses and young kids. We have caregivers in both places, and you can't export these jobs overseas. And we should decide that we're going to pay people a living wage, and we're going to have to work with the unions that you mentioned earlier, CL. We're going to have to work with each other to figure out how we can make the kind of investment when it comes to elder care and when it comes to child care to be able to pay people a living wage. And we're living in a world right now, and you know this, where people that are caregivers are living in closets. They've got no place, to go call a home. They're not getting paid enough to be able to raise their own family. We've got to somehow push our way through that, and those will be some of the hard choices that we make.
I'm sorry, I should have asked this sooner, earlier when you were talking about the Colorado River. Any thoughts on data centers?
Yeah. So it's been really interesting to be on the campaign trail on this. People in Colorado their view is they do not want their electric prices going up because of data centers. And they do not want our water situation getting worse because of data centers. And I think it's been important to have communities say we got to slow it down a little bit so we can understand how it's going to work. I just read an article last week in the Wall Street Journal that said that Phoenix, Arizona is talking about raising electric prices 14% for people and 40% for businesses because of the data centers that they've been doing down there. So if we are going to do it, it's got to be sustainable from an economic point of view and from a community point of view and environmental point of view. And in terms of AI, could I just answer that, or did your AI machine give you a question?
These were from...
I'm kidding. She said she used ChatGPT, not me. But I think in terms of AI too, we're living in a time of divided politics where people say, oh, we got to believe everything that the people in that corner are saying, everything the people in that corner are saying. And on AI, you hear people, there's some group of people who say, this is going to be the greatest thing in the world because we're only going to work 2 days a week. It's like the ancient Greeks, we're going to be able to work 2 days a week and just contemplate the ocean the rest of the time. And then there are people on the other end who say this is going to be the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. And the truth will lie somewhere in between, as it always does with technological changes. My kids' generation are deeply, deeply worried about what this is going to mean for their jobs and their ability to earn a living. And Colorado's going to have to pay real attention to that. And as a nation, we're going to have to do a better job than we have historically when we faced economic dislocation because of trade or because of technology. And we haven't really caught up to figure out how we can keep people working at jobs that pay them a decent wage. That's part of the reason I think we're in the economic challenge that we're in today. And AI really could compound that if we're not careful. On the other hand, we want to have the innovation. It could have a profoundly useful effect in terms of healthcare, something we were talking about earlier, and curing diseases, finding new pharmaceuticals, and allowing us maybe someday to actually design molecules that can pluck CO2 out of the air. Those are the kind of things that were unimaginable before this that are now at least imaginable.
Speaking of polarization, what's your thoughts on Colorado redrawing our U.S. House districts to give Dems an advantage like Texas GOP did?
Yeah, I think we have to fight fire with fire. We can't let Trump just get away with all this stuff. We just can't. But it's it is also heartbreaking, you know. And I was the first member of the U.S. Congress to write a bill that banned partisan gerrymandering, that said you should not gerrymander for political purposes. And I hope once we get past this moment of insanity that we're in now, where we do have to fight fire with fire, that we can reestablish a much more sensible way of doing it.
Talk about, you were original group of 8 on immigration. You want to talk about your thoughts on immigration, where we are?
I'd love to. So my perspective, again, comes from my mom and her family on immigration. You know, they really did live the American dream. And my grandmother, to this day, I mean, we have many people from other countries in Colorado, and we have many people with very strong accents. To this day, I have yet to find one who has a stronger accent than my grandmother had. And she insisted to the day that she died that she didn't have an accent at all. But they loved it. Nobody I know loves this country as much as immigrants do. She loved it. She loved it. And my grandfather loved it. And then I went to work in the Denver Public Schools, and we worked hard to make sure that we could get in-state tuition for the dreamers that were here, the kids that were brought here when they were young, had no country other than the United States. I was very proud of Colorado leading in that effort, and I'm glad to have been part of that. And the school district was 59% Latino, and in Colorado, those of you that lived in Colorado for a long time knows that our Latino population is very diverse. I mean, there are people that have been here long before it was ever a state, like Ken Salazar's family from San Luis Valley, and then people that have come here much more recently. So when I got to the Senate, they were putting together this group that ended up being called the Gang of 8. There were 4 Republicans and there were 4 Democrats. And this is worth talking about a little bit because it'll tell you how much the world has changed. The 4 Democrats, I was one, Chuckles was another one, there were a couple other ones. The Republicans were John McCain, my friend, Lindsey Graham, who, by the way, was the only person in that moment who was actually up for election. He was up for election in South Carolina working on a bill that one of the 4 principles of the bill was a pathway to citizenship for the 12 million people that are here. That tells you what's changed. And little Marco was on that group. I don't know what's happened to him. I don't know what's happened to him. And Jeff Flake, who is a great guy from Arizona, who is also from a border state like McCain. And that bill was amazing. I mean, it had a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people. It had the DREAM Act, the most progressive DREAM Act that had ever been written. It had all the visa stuff that's so important to our economy, from our rural economy, our agricultural economy, to our elder care economy. I mean, we addressed all those issues, and we had a ton of border security in that bill, which we all believed was important as well, because the American people want to have a secure border. And we passed it with 68 votes in the Senate. And it went over to the House of Representatives, and John Boehner, who is then the Speaker, you'll remember him, He wouldn't put it down for a vote. And the Tea Party got to drive a stake through the bill, and they basically had a veto on the bill. If you read Boehner's book, and it's kind of hilarious, he writes about smoking cigarettes, which he does, drinking Chablis, and mowing his lawn with a lawnmower, which is kind of funny. He says the worst decision he made as a politician was not putting the Gang of Eight bill on the floor, because it would have passed. You know, and what's amazing is when McCain and Graham were doing this, they were doing it because they didn't believe they would ever elect another Republican president if they didn't help fix the immigration system, by making it better. That's what they believed. And then think what happened. What happened was your friend Donald Trump rode down that escalator at Trump Tower on the first day he announced his presidency and said, Mexicans are rapists, and he went off to win the nomination and win the presidency. And now none of those people will do anything to fix the problem. And Trump is, spending all his time and all our money deporting people all over this country. And so you ask me why I care about it. That's why I care about it. I'm passionate about it. I've fought Trump on all this stuff along the way. And as governor, what I've said over and over and over again is that we can't let these federal law enforcement officers in here wearing masks. We can't allow them to be knocking on our doors with no warrants. We can't allow them to separate kids from their parents at the border. I'm telling you, when my mom saw Trump doing that in the first Trump administration, she called me up and said, I see myself in the children at the border. And she could see the cost, the human cost to what was happening. So this nation at its, we are many, many things, but two of the things we are is a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. And we need to get to a place where we're fighting for an immigration policy that looks just like or very similar to the Gang of Eight bill that we wrote. Today, even with all the insanity that's gone on and Trump and all the rest, the last Wall Street Journal poll, which was admittedly 10 months or so ago, said that more than 70% of the American people support a pathway to citizenship for the people that are here that are undocumented. Why is that? Because the American people know most of these folks are law-abiding people. They know that they are working in senior citizen centers all over America, especially in rural America, and that there's no way to replace that workforce. They know that it's critical to our agricultural economy and that we will not be able to feed ourselves in this country pursuing Donald Trump's insane, and I use the word advisedly, immigration policy. So this is a very good illustration of what's at stake if we don't figure out how to overcome Trump. I'm all for fighting Trump. We have to fight Trump, but what we really have to do is beat Trump and beat Trumpism and turn the page on this moment in American history. And that goes back, CL, to your question earlier. At prior moments like this, when we've been living in a golden age kind of like this, but it was Rockefeller, not Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, it was the American people who pushed back finally and said, we're going to change the way we do things. You think about it, 100 years ago, the American people invented the ACLU. It had not existed before. We invented the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. In fact, I was just reading that history the other day. That started with a lawsuit about black sharecroppers in Phillips County, Arkansas, which is right next to where my wife grew up in Lee County, Arkansas. And that became the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We started the modern labor movement in that time. And Franklin Roosevelt was able to inherit that as part of what became the core of the New Deal, which led to not just one of the longest progressive eras in American history, but one of the longest progressive eras in human history. And that's the moment that I think we're in right now. That's the moment that we're in right now. I mean, Trump is I've had ads running, you may have seen them, I hope you haven't seen too many of them, but I've had ads running saying Trump's the worst president we've ever had. And I believe that. but I would never, ever, ever, ever give him the satisfaction of believing that we think he's permanent, or the satisfaction of thinking that we can't overcome him, or the satisfaction of believing that this moment that we're in isn't temporary, just like all the reactionary moments that we've had going back to the founding of this country, half slave and half free. We've been in this battle from those days. And to me, I sometimes am in meetings, this is not one of them, I'm sometimes in meetings where people have been watching cable TV all day. I mean, that will make you give up hope to begin with. But where people are giving up hope, and it's all like, this is the worst moment in human history. And he is the worst president in American history, but this is not the worst moment in human history. And to say that we're going to lose hope dishonors all the people that have fought and battled throughout our history to get us where we are today. You think...
So, Michael?
Let me just finish this thought. You think about the women that fought for 100 years in America for the self-evident right to vote. And most of them will never know their names, will never, ever know their names. They were beaten, all kinds of things were done to them, and most of them died before the vote was won. But the vote was won about 100 years ago when we were living in a gilded age like this. You know, you think about John Lewis, who is Joe Negus's friend in the House of Representatives, who subjected his skull to the billy clubs on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the sake of our democracy, not for John Lewis. And I've been saying to people all over Colorado, that no matter how corrupt you think this situation is, and it is really corrupt, how corrupt you think the government is, and it is, and how corrupt you think it is that the richest people in the country are getting richer and richer, and middle-class people, it's harder and harder. We have no reason to think the world is more corrupt than John Lewis did when he was on that bridge. And therefore, we have no excuse to give up. And we can't give up. And there is nobody riding to your rescue. If you think that, you know, those guys that you watch on the cable are somehow coming here to rescue you from this, I don't mean rescue you from Windsor Gardens. I mean rescue you from the Trump situation. You know, that's not the way it works. It's the American people working together, finding common cause, building a community that says we're going to fight like hell to make sure that our kids can afford to live in this state. And at the same time we're doing that, we're going to demonstrate that we can make our democracy strong, that it's resilient, that it can not only survive Trump, but become stronger as a result of the fire that it's gone through. That's the time that we're living in right now. And I think that it's a privilege, really. I mean, it's horrible to have Trump there. But the fact that we live in America is an incredible privilege. The fact that we still have the right to vote, even though he's trying to take it away, is a privilege. And we have to make it count. We really do.
We're past our time, but I don't want to cut anybody out if there's one or two questions.
Is there go ahead, Seal. I'm not going to call anybody. You call in people.
Go ahead.
My question is, it was so many Republicans insanely supporting Trump. It reminds me of Hitler and his cabal. Do you see them moving against him now? Are they and if not, is there anything that you can do as government?
We got to beat these guys is what we have to do. And then at some point, hopefully they'll begin to see a sense. But it is, 2 years ago, people were saying to me, how is it possible that these people would let him be the kleptocrat that he is? How is it possible they let him make these crazy decisions about Iran or make $4 billion on crypto while he's in the office I was pleased to see a guy that I've known for let's say it this way. I'm very happy that the federal judge last week took Trump's name off the Kennedy Center. That was a good thing. But here's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about what's going to happen to John Cornyn in Texas. And you just saw what happened to Senator John Cornyn in Texas, who got beat by a Trump guy who himself was impeached by the Republicans in Texas for bad behavior. And you know, these people are now wearing this stuff like it's a badge of honor. So I don't think they're going to do any of this out of the kindness of their heart. That place is like a cult of personality for Donald Trump. The Republicans there. The problem with the Democrats is different. The problem with the Democrats is I think we don't really understand. I feel like I understand it, but I think many of them do not understand why we lost to Trump, that we were repudiating the elections. They keep sending out emails to everybody saying how corrupt Trump is, which he obviously is, but as if the American people don't understand that, which they do. And so what we have to do is figure out how to win. That's what we have to do. And I think we can do it. I think we can build that kind of coalition.
There was another, go ahead.
Okay, this is not a question, it's a thank you. You don't know me, but you know my daughter, Kimberly Copeland, and you helped our family with the immigration issue.
Thank you.
Bringing our Ukrainian family here, and they're still here.
Fantastic.
Doing great.
Great.
They have great jobs. One of them owns the White House business, and they're just really contributing, and they're very happy.
And what is the business that they own?
Oh, she is a nail.
Oh, got it.
She owns a nail
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
and he's a mechanic, and he has a really good job.
And how's Kimberly doing? Good. Say hi. Say hi. This is another one where I won't even talk about it, but I'll just say this. The Ukrainian people are fighting a battle for democracy for the entire world, and they deserve our support. They've earned our support. It shouldn't even be a question what they've done. And it's amazing to see it. I mean, it is amazing. They are now doing so much damage to Putin's army that a year ago or 2 years ago, Trump was giving them up for dead, and now they're just fighting. When you meet Zelensky, it's such an interesting thing because this guy, he's the president now, of Ukraine. He was a movie actor before he was the president. And he had a TV show where he was basically mocking the political process, and he ended up running for president kind of as a joke, a joke, and he got elected president. So here he is, president of Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin invades his country. And it's the weight of the entire world. It would be like it dropped on anybody's shoulders in this room. But it just happened to be him. And it's kind of an amazing thing to see how he's hung in there, how the Ukrainian people have hung in there. It's such a testament to the human spirit, and such a testament to what people will do to protect their homeland, to protect their democracy, to protect themselves from tyranny. It's a reminder of what all this is worth fighting for. Yeah, I do. I don't know.
Do you think that your experience as senator would help you in making decisions for our state as government?
I definitely believe it. I mean, look, I've spent a lot of years at the highest level of our national politics, and I'm not going to claim that it works well all the time back there, but I have been able to put points on the board for Colorado the whole time I've been there. The public lands are a good example of that. I wrote the child tax credit that cut childhood poverty in half in this country during the Biden administration. And I also think I've been fighting to try, stuff like Shoshone, the call that I mentioned earlier. Those are the kind of things I'll be able to do. The first thing I was doing this morning was meeting with my colleague senators in the West to make sure we're getting the resources we need out of the agriculture department and the other departments there because of the fire season. So yes, I think so. And I think the fact that there aren't a lot of people that go from that job to this job is simply a case of people like the fact that back there aren't term limits. And when you're governor, there are term limits. And my view is we all have term limits, one kind or another, and I want to make sure I use the time that I have as well as I can.
Thank you so much for spending so much time with us.
Thank you.